In our time together today, we're going to look at how many church leaders could become more effective in mobilising their members as witnesses for Jesus. It's often recognised that what we do produces results, but what we do comes from the way that we think. And so sometimes if we want to get different results, what we actually have to do is change the way we think. Often in our churches, when we've had problems, we look for program solutions. And if we apply this to the area of outreach, let's say we recognise that our church isn't very engaged in outreach and our members in particular aren't in their daily lives. Well, maybe we look for an outreach program that we can run. Maybe we do a 4-week sermon series, but the problem is that it ends. Maybe we invite an evangelist to run a training on a Saturday, but a few people come along and afterwards it's finished. We send people on a mission trip and then they return. We maybe do an outreach in our local community or in a park, but then it's over and things seem to keep slipping back to how they were before. You see, you can't fix a paradigm or thinking problem with a program solution. What is needed is a different way of thinking. And that's what we're seeking to bring to you. A different way of thinking about outreach and outreach mobilisation, which at its core has the mobilisation of members to engage everyday conversations. So we're going to present to you a habit-based approach. We're going to look at 6 principles applied through 4 habits, and these deliberately fit within what we already do as key church leaders. So this is no more work to apply than not to apply. It's about intentionality, and it can make a big difference. Let's start. The first principle is to motivate. We're going to somehow need to motivate our members to capture the heart of Jesus, that was filled with compassion as he looked upon the crowds because he saw that they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 9. Then second principle, we need to equip our members to be able to communicate the gospel winsomely within their culture. But then we're going to need to reinforce personally what we taught. If we teach from a pulpit, people remember 10% of what they hear. But if we teach through small groups and they discuss it together, people remember 40% of what they say. Having reinforced, we also want to remind them. For example, if we teach a child that 2 + 2 = 4, we immediately personally reinforce by asking, what does 2 + 2 equal? And they say 4. But then if we're wise, we remind them an hour later, a day later, then a week later, and a month later, and a couple of months later again, until they've been reminded enough that it's gone into long-term memory. Of course, in what we're talking about here, we want things to go into long-term practice. Having reminded regularly, we then, principle number 5, need to model what it looks and smells like. And finally, principle 6, we need to do the previous 5 principles consistently. It's about consistency. Let's take these 6 principles then, and let's see how they could be placed within what we already do on a weekly basis as church leaders in our annual planning calendars. First of all, consistency is covered by the fact that we're looking at an annual calendar. These are the months of the year, and we're looking at habits that we repeat every year. Now, the first principle of motivation, this can be covered through a motivational message at the beginning of every school term. That's around about every 3 months, where we talk about the heart of Jesus to remind our members of why the church still exists and why Jesus hasn't yet returned. We then help them to see the opportunities that exist for them in outreach, in their own lives and in the small group life of our church, as well as in the community programs that we might have as a congregation. To equip our members, we also do this through the pulpit. Maybe at the beginning of the year, having a 4-week equipping series that we then reinforce through our small groups. Now, this would be greatly helped if someone would provide us with some free sermon outlines with small group studies. So the motivating, equipping and reinforcing could all be done very easily, and hence that's therefore what we do. Now, how are we going to remind? And our answer is through a monthly testimony. It's not difficult to find a testimony, whether on video or someone in your congregation, of someone who's engaged a spiritual conversation in the last week or 2. But the point is in the testimony, because while that's a good way to model, our point is about reminding. We use the positive momentum of that testimony to remind them of what we talked about at the start of the year. And as we master the art of this, it's possible to have members applying things actively in October, November and December that we'd actually taught them back at February, near the start of the year. And the final of these to communicate is modelling. where we can, of course, model through our own example and through our stories and the testimonies that we have shared, but we also need to model clear gospel preaching, at least twice a year, where we communicate the gospel really simply, so simply that our members say, "What are we paying that guy or girl for?" And then we have a testimony where the reality of the gospel message is demonstrated and we give people a response opportunity. Finally, if we embrace Global Outreach Day in our calendars, this can also help because it gives us a day on which people can take first steps. It's so easy to put outreach off until tomorrow. So to have a day on which every Christian is encouraged to make personal effort, having a barbecue with a neighbour or coffee with a friend, it makes a difference because a habit starts with a first step. And what we provide for you in all of this is resources to support. As mentioned, there are sermon outlines with matching studies, but also concise equipping videos to play in church services or small groups, as well as, if you need them, some testimony videos to help you out there. To wrap up, I'd like to answer 3 questions very quickly. First of all, how much work is this to apply? And the answer is hardly any. This requires no extra work for a pastor outside of what we already potentially do in an average week. It's simply about bringing intentionality to what we do, and it's made even easier by the fact that there are free support resources. Secondly, how could a church keep themselves accountable to sustain this focus? This is a very good question to ask because it's easy to start something and then not follow through. And if we ran this for a few months or 1 year and then stopped, it's no different to any other program. It doesn't have the power to change culture like that. It's about the fact that they become habits. We need to therefore, as leadership teams, put these things in our calendars so we are reminded to follow the different practices that have been suggested. But maybe also to put in our planning calendars little notes next to when we might have leadership team meetings so we can discuss our progress and how we are going. And the third question, how will you measure if this is working? Well, in churches who are applying this, typically we see 4 things beginning to take place. They see an increase in the number of their members engaging in everyday spiritual conversations. They see an increase in the number of people visiting their church, not only by invitation, but simply because the Holy Spirit begins to draw them to that church because the members are equipped and ready. Thirdly, the members become more friendly towards new people who visit because they are more other conscious and more desiring to help encourage people to consider faith and more hospitable. And then fourthly, they see an increase in the number of people who make decisions to follow Christ. I would encourage you therefore to note in your planning calendar where your leadership team meetings are, times when you'd seek to assess this. And maybe you could find a way to measure whether or not there's an increase in people engaging spiritual conversation, as you intentionally encourage them to do so, of course, whether you've got an increase in visitors and an increase in the number of people who are choosing to follow Christ. In summary, the church has a mission, and it is surely the main responsibility of the main leaders in any church to ensure that the mission of God's church is authentically the mission of their local church. And so I encourage you, please, apply these 4 habits in your leadership. Put them on the calendar until you are used to doing them, because while they're incredibly simple, they have the power to change culture. You can motivate your members through the pulpit. You can equip your members through a pulpit series every year. You can reinforce this personally through getting them to discuss this in the small group. You can also remind them through having testimonies that model that you use as a springboard for reminders of things you taught earlier in the year. And then you can model not only through those testimonies, but through your own gospel preaching. Finally, one simple thought. Remember, there is great potential within your members in your congregation. There are amazing people in your church who have a heart for Jesus and a heart for those who do not know Him. If you will equip and mobilize them, they have the ability to connect with far more people than you can in the community and to take Christ to them. As they grow a bigger heart and begin to dream dreams, they have the ability to innovate in outreach and to achieve amazing things. So I would encourage you to believe this wholeheartedly, because 100 mobilized members can achieve far more than any talented pastor or even small group leader. Please believe in the potential within your members, and I pray that as you do this, the Lord will make you effective in making your members effective.